So I'm making a video today about the behavioral tells of predators. I feel like a lot of times, a lot of us are really intimidated by the idea of an intelligent predator. We sometimes maybe think that we're not capable of casing people, of reading behavioral tells, or assessing our surroundings in the way that they are able to, but it's not true. It might be more intuitive to them, it might come faster to them, but this is absolutely a skill that we can learn as well. And I think that there are absolutely behavioral tells to predators, and it's actually not that hard to read them and figure out what they are, and that's what I'm going to kind of explain to you in this video today. One reason why I feel like this skill is really important, and something that I just want to reiterate that I've stated in other videos, is that once you have been someone who survived an experience or an event with a predator or a person who brainwashes, you are now more susceptible and more vulnerable to being found by another predator or someone who brainwashes in the future. Mainly because after we survive our first event with a predator or a manipulator, we are oftentimes, most of the time, left primed because we are still brainwashed. So we leave the predator, we leave the abuser, but the indoctrination and the shift and the change that they've caused inside our mind, that's still there. And so we really are, in my opinion, primed for and ready, unfortunately, almost for the next predator, because we still have our predator's brainwashing going on. And so this makes us incredibly vulnerable, more vulnerable than the average person in some ways, especially because predators can kind of sense, smell, read this on us. We have a lot of behavioral tells that they do see. And so I think this skill of being able to also read the behavioral tells of a predator is almost necessary for survivors of abuse, cults, brainwashing, domestic violence, things like that, because we're very primed and ready until we are unable to successfully undo that brainwashing, which oftentimes takes years, to be honest. This might be kind of a dark comparison, but sometimes in my own mind I call this hunting predators, but that's only on like a really bad day. Another thing that I want to reiterate is this isn't just for romantic situations. Like I've stated in other videos of mine, this is for familial situations, this is for business situations. There's lots of different areas in life where people are groomed, brainwashed, indoctrinated into things on a daily basis. And so if you can recognize these indicators, this can help you get out of any type of situation like this faster. So just to jump right into it, how do you tell the behavioral tells of a predator? Well, the first thing you need to know is what they crave. And so most people are aware of this, but for just the average person who maybe, is just starting to jump into this kind of area of information, a lot of times they do crave sex. They crave feelings of power, feelings of control. They oftentimes crave stimulation, any form of stimulation, which can come in the form of sex and power. A lot of times they also are motivated by assets, receiving and controlling the assets around them, or they might be using someone for assets that that person has that they want. So knowing what they're craving helps you see what they might be pursuing with you. The other thing that I think it's important to note about people like this, just people who we're trying to avoid who do display addictions and primal needs for these types of things. The other thing that they display, which John Gottman has talked about, and if you don't know him, I'll link a couple of videos of interviews that he's done down below. John Gottman is a mathematician who's actually studied marriages and is able to predict within a 90% success rate of whether a relationship will fail or succeed, specifically a marriage. But one trait that he talks about is a person, specifically a man's ability to accept influence from a woman in his life. And for those of you who have studied psychopaths, narcissists, manipulative people, emotionally regressed people of sorts, I think one thing that we all know is that what he means by this is envision a husband who has no ability to be flexible in any regard for his partner. So the example that he gives in one interview that I saw was a husband who, let's say the wife asks if he can rearrange his work schedule for the week for dinner with her parents. For some husbands, this would absolutely be something that they would be willing to do for their wives. But for other men, there is absolutely no willingness to be flexible. And in a lot of times abusive relationships, we see that lack of flexibility as well, that lack of an ability to accept our influence over their life, to let us affect them and change them, essentially. And John Gottman talks about how women oftentimes are ready and more willing to accept influence from people, and with men, it's much harder. And so this is something that he sees as an essential characteristic to a successful marriage or relationship. And so that ties into what I'm kind of getting at as well, which is that oftentimes for narcissists, psychopaths, and manipulative people, it is intolerable for them to not get their way. It's psychologically grating on their nerves for them to not get their way, which is sort of a different version of what he's discussing. This lack of flexibility also translates into this infantile characteristic that we see in these people, where they essentially throw different versions of temper tantrums when they don't get their way, and the only thing that really seems to motivate them is them getting their way, which is them, again, not being willing to change their lives for us outside of that honeymoon stage where they're love bombing us and changing a bunch of things just to impress us short term. That's a different thing. So we know what they crave. They crave power, they crave sex, they crave stimulation, they crave assets and resources for them specifically. And we also know what is very difficult for them, if not impossible, which is them not getting their way. And so what I pose to you is the first way of being able to read them and their behavioral tells is to essentially hold something outside of their grasp for the first few months that you're meeting this person. You can decide what that is, what kind of standard that you want to set, or what kind of thing that you want to make unavailable to them. But I really encourage you to find something, because what this does is it shows you their character. And a lot of different ways all at once. And I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that. So when you're dealing with someone like this, we know the types of traits that we want to avoid in a person, the things that I just listed. You want someone who's able to be flexible. You want a partner who's able to accept your influence over their life, just like you're willing to do for them. You don't want someone who's just using you for sex. You don't want someone who's just using you as a source of stimulation. You don't want someone who's using you for resources, assets, access to your kids, things that are predatory, right? So when you hold something outside of their grasp, something that becomes unattainable, it's important to know what you're trying to avoid, but it's also important to know what you're looking for, the thing that you want. And for me personally, the thing that I'm looking for and the thing that I want is loyalty, protectiveness, and sacrificial love. These are the main characteristics that I'm looking for. And so someone who has the ability to be loyal to me, be protective of me, and have a sacrificial mindset in regards to my needs is going to reach for a thing that is technically unattainable or outside of their grasp. They're going to reach for the thing that they can't have in a different way than a person will who doesn't like things being unattainable to them, who struggles with not getting their way, someone who it's intolerable to them to not get their way, someone who craves and is addicted to sex, stimulation, power, and resources. Those two people are going to reach for things that are unattainable in two completely different ways. And they will also react to the idea of that thing being unattainable in two completely different ways. So the person who is predatory that I'm describing, the way that they reach for something, from my experience, because I've done this enough times now where I've held something outside of their grasp, which is sex, when I hold that thing outside of their grasp and make it unattainable, I've really seen a pattern to how people who are predatory and unsafe reach for that thing. And the best way to summarize this is soft abuse. So I think soft abuse is basically the pre-stages to what dark abuse looks like later, deeper into the relationship, when we've been with this person long enough that once again they are abusing us because things are not going their way. If I had to summarize abuse in general is us being abused because we are not following what the predator and what the abuser wants to a T. We've bound down to them and we've submitted to them enough that their standards for what we should be doing for them, the ways that they should be getting their way, get more and more extreme. The standard raises up more and more over time. But I really think most of abuse is them just really torturing us more and more for not giving them their way with more and more specific things. And so to hold something outside of someone's grasp in the early stages of the relationship really can show you the soft forms of abuse very early that really are just the lighter versions of the exact same tactics that they're going to use later on. And they will show you these traits very quickly. It's almost impossible for them not to, because this is who they really are, and this is how they genuinely react to not getting their way. It is so hard for them. It is so uncomfortable for them. It is so almost impossible for them to tolerate not getting their way, that you will see the soft abuse almost immediately, but you just have to watch out for it. One example of this is there was a guy that I was talking to, and I've gotten a lot more confident in, if I feel like someone is lying to me, really digging my heels in, not being rude, not being aggressive, but really pushing in the conversation to resolve whether there is a lie going on or not. And I never would have been able to do that earlier in my life. I was much too submissive and I was much too afraid of conflict. Whereas now, over time, I've practiced doing this enough that even though I am still uncomfortable, I am able to dig my heels in and say, wait, I feel like there's a contradiction going on here. You said one thing over here and you're saying this thing now. And it usually is in regards to something that's kind of important to me. So there was one guy that I was kind of talking to, and we had a very in-depth conversation just about intimacy, his fear of intimacy, things like that. And we had a really good conversation where I left feeling like we were on the same page about stuff. And then not even 2 days later, we were on the phone, and somehow it got brought up again. And I very lightly kind of touched on one of the things that we had discussed the few days ago. And he immediately started acting like I was misremembering him, saying that there must have been a huge misunderstanding because what I was saying is not what he had said 2 days ago at all, and did basically a complete 180 in taking back what he had said and now changing it to almost a completely different answer. And I got very upset and I dug my heels in, whereas in the past I probably would have doubted myself and said, wow, I'm so confused. I must have misunderstood him. I don't understand how that happened, but like how embarrassing. Because again, they're very convincing in how they say these things, but this time I really dug my heels in and I said, no, you said this, I said this, you said this. I don't understand how a misunderstanding could have possibly occurred. And what often happens with these guys, which leaves me encouraged to do this more and more, is I'm surprised how many times when I dig my heels in a little bit in a more passive way, they end up admitting to me that they're lying to me, that there wasn't a misunderstanding. They end up apologizing, essentially, and it's really surprising to me how this works. But he ended up saying, okay, you know what, it wasn't a misunderstanding. I just kind of have this habit of just agreeing with people and kind of just saying what they want to hear, essentially. And I was very surprised that he admitted that to me, because that's you admitting that you lied to people. That is what that is. Especially if you're doing such in-depth conversations with them. And this isn't an example of someone not getting their way, but this is an example of soft abuse. Because what he did is he attempted to convince me that I had misremembered him and that there was something wrong or flawed in the way that I was able to retain information from our conversation. And if I had not dug my heels in and really pushed back on what he was telling me, he would have been more than willing to let me walk away from that conversation believing that I had an issue with, I in my mind had issues and difficulties with remembering things correctly. And this is a soft version. This is absolutely not okay at any level whatsoever, but this is a soft version, in my opinion, of the very extreme versions of gaslighting that happen later, where the language becomes even more demeaning. I don't think anything he explicitly said to me was that harsh, but the harshness was in what he was willing to let me believe about myself. He was willing to sacrifice me so that he could look good and he could achieve the narrative that he wanted to exist to get his way. So that is not a sacrificial mindset. That is not a mindset that's protective of me. That's a mindset that's protective of him. And so I just wanted to kind of give you that example of soft abuse. This isn't something being withheld from him, but this is an example of soft abuse. However, this is also the same exact type of thing and the same exact type of behavior that happens when I withhold sex as well. And I know a lot of times nowadays people hear someone say wait to have sex and they roll their eyes and they think that this is such an outdated, ancient concept. But I'm really going to challenge you guys not from necessarily the standpoint of morality or anything like that, but from the standpoint of safety and the standpoint of you are robbing yourself of if you give yourself away, if you give sex away too quickly, I'm just letting you know you are truly robbing yourself of the opportunity to see if they display any of these characteristics for soft abuse when you don't give something to them that a lot of times they are desperately craving. Sex for a predator and a predatory mindset, it represents so much. In my opinion, from what I've seen. It gives them that sense of power. First of all, sex is an incredibly strong psychological tool. When I have sex with someone, it makes me attached to them faster than I normally would be. It adds another layer of intimacy that makes it difficult for you to stay emotionally detached enough in order and emotionally distant enough to continue to assess them in the way that you might have been able to before. It just adds another layer. And there's even a woman on YouTube that I follow who is a diagnosed sociopath who strongly encourages people to not have sex too quickly. And she also says that it's for the exact same reasons that I just listed. So I'm not the only one saying this, but I really do encourage people to withhold sex, because when I have, and I never used to do this, I used to be so bad at this, and this is something that's very difficult for survivors of abuse to do, and I also do want to acknowledge that it is very hard for us because we have been indoctrinated to have weak boundaries, to doubt ourselves, to fall for the gaslighting, to really associate how love is proven with providing sex enough. I know that is a huge thing for survivors of abuse and manipulation. A lot of times we think that one of the main ways that love is proven is strictly through sex, not a lot of other ways. We weren't provided other narratives for how to provide sex to our partners. And so that type of brainwashing is very hard to undo. And all of these things can also make it very hard for us to withhold sex. And I just want to acknowledge that. I get that because I also struggled with it for the same exact reasons. But if you can start practicing this, withholding sex, or any asset, if you want to choose something else, really will give you this first tell, which is the biggest tell, as to whether they are someone who cannot tolerate having something withheld from them. They'll say with their words that they're okay with it. A lot of times that's what I experience. We're upfront. Every single person who's ended up lying to me about this always upfront said that they were fine with it. They never, to my face, said that they had a problem with this. But the soft abuse always came later, and the contradictions always came later, and the behavioral tells of reaching for the sex in a selfish, soft, abusive way that a loyal, protective, sacrificial person would not reach for it. They always end up doing it and showing me who they really are by how they reach for the sex in the ways that I've described that the other person would not. You have to understand that if you're always just giving them everything that they want right off the bat, you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to see how they are when they don't get the things that they want. And you will find that out long term, but it's better for you to find that out up front before you're too emotionally attached. But the other thing is that you're not allowing yourself to heal from your previous indoctrination. Whoever it was that taught you that your needs didn't matter, whoever it was that first taught you that you should bow down and be submissive to everyone around you, whoever it was that robbed you of the opportunity to feel like you had the right to go slow, to move at your own autonomous pace, prove them wrong. Because every time that you involve yourself with someone and constantly move at their pace and constantly allow yourself to be a leaf in the wind that moves at the rhythm of their wishes and their desires, you're only enabling this kind of brainwashing further. And so there's so many reasons why, if you are someone who struggles with boundaries, if you are someone who struggles with being assertive, if you are someone who struggles with knowing what you want as your own individual person and pushing and staying confident in that, if you're someone who struggles with these things, Now is the time to learn to practice with someone who you're involved with romantically, to practice doing that. You don't have to pick sex. You can pick whatever you want, but pick something. Pick something that is yours, that is your own thing, that no matter what they want, no matter how different they are in the things that they desire, there is something that you personally have chosen is your moral pull that you're going to hold on to, that is important to you, and that other people need to move towards you, need to move at your rhythms for. Whatever that is, find it, decide what it will be, and then see who is willing to move at your rhythm and your pace for that thing, just like you are normally willing to move at their rhythm and their pace, because you're looking for someone who will also do that for you. I just think it's important to address this because there can still be aspects of abuse that we are indoctrinated to, and that does include the love bombing process. So, we all know that abuse is something that we don't want to experience. We all know that abuse is something bad, and yet there can still be aspects to abuse, like the love bombing process and the stages of it, that we think are okay. And it's really important to understand that if you are still falling for these tactics, and if your moral system still aligns with them, even in this beginning process and in these beginning stages, that is how abuse starts. That's how abuse starts to happen, in order for the other stages that are harmful, that are truly abusive, to happen later. And so you have to end it before it starts. You have to end it in the beginning stages. And so this is why I feel like it's so imperative to address the way that so many girls and so many men and so many people are dating nowadays, because these beginning stages is where I see so many people still indoctrinated. They're saying that they think abuse is wrong. They're saying that they don't want to be abused, but then when they discuss the ways that they date people, they are absolutely engaging in love bombing tactics. The only way that I can think to kind of explain this from a different perspective, which does help people sometimes, is, let's say somebody said that they were against someone hunting humans, right? Totally against that. But then they were asked, well, how do you feel about someone tying you up? They'd be like, oh, no, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with someone tying me up and putting me in a bag. I'm just not okay with hunting humans. Obviously, you can hear the contradiction in that, but that's kind of what I'm saying. People say that they don't want to be abused and that abuse is wrong, but then the most significant aspect of abuse, which is the honeymoon stage, this is the thing that holds us psychologically captive throughout the entire relationship. We crave the honeymoon stage. We're trying to constantly get back to it. And so this is the stage that is most important to reframe and rewire your brain around. If your morals align with them and how you think love is proved in a relationship, if you think love is proved and determined in the same way that a predator does, then you are going to continue to fall for a predator's tactics. That's just how it works. If your morals align from your brainwashing to where you do think that love is proved solely by providing sex all the time, or if you think that love is proved by moving really fast in the relationship and being love bombed, if you think love is proved by you being called the special one, things like this, if your morals, if those types of morals align with theirs because of our previous brainwashing, oftentimes they do until we undo it, you're not going to see a lot of these red flags. And it's going to be very difficult for you to break the cycle of falling for these tactics, because you will still believe that this is how love is proved. So us slowing it down is one way of us changing, us having the same moral system as them with these things, if that makes sense. Because that is a part of undoing your brainwashing, is changing the beliefs that have been ingrained into you for how love is proven and how love is expressed in a relationship. And this could be the starting point of that for you. The second way you can call their bluff is the fact that A very common tactic used by manipulative people is extravagant promise making that is actually based on a lie. And so I have actually watched videos by diagnosed sociopaths who admitted that they do this, that they make extravagant promises that are a lie to get what they want. Is saying that they used to be a part of some special ops in the government, acting like they have connections to high up people, acting like they have more money than they actually do. This is just something that they do to make themselves seem more impressive than they actually are, or like they can be more of a provider than they actually can be. This one gets a little bit tricky because you want to make sure that you don't become entrapped by accepting any favors. But one way that I have found to actually prove that they are an extravagant promise maker is by taking them up on their offers. So, for example, there was one guy that I was dating whose father had connections allegedly to high up surgeons, high up like doctors, things like that. And I was running into some health issues. And he kept telling me all the time that he could get me in to see X, Y, and Z doctors. I think a lot of these people are banking on the fact that we are either too kind to take them up on the offers, which oftentimes we are, or two, that we will merely be impressed with the story without even actually thinking about asking for something in return after they mention that they have connections to X, Y, and Z things. They don't think that we will actually follow up and fact check any of that in any form, or that we will actually ask for something for ourselves, because a lot of times we are that kind of caregiver person. So with the guy I was dating who allegedly had these connections to doctors, my health issues, my GI issues got bad enough that I asked him if he could actually set me up an appointment with one of these guys. And he said, yeah, that he would do it absolutely. And he never actually did it. And I have seen that with other people as well, with things that have been offered to me. Once I started having the gumption enough to actually follow up and say, hey, you offered me that thing, I would like it. Now, I don't do this with everything, because there's also been people who have offered to buy me a house. I'm not going to let you buy me a house. You want to talk about entrapment? Let somebody buy you a house, okay? Because you're going to be a slave inside that house. Don't do that. But for things that are more feasible, or even things where it's like, oh, I could fly you. Well, don't do that either. You probably get trafficked. For some things, you can call them on their bluff by either taking them up on certain favors, or even just pressing deeper into the story to see if, once taken beyond its face value level of whatever first version they gave you of the story, if the story changes once you follow up on it again. That you can do that. They can tell you a story, and then a few weeks later you can ask about the story again. And as you continue to ask more and more questions about these stories, usually it begins to contradict itself or fall apart. But this extravagant promise making thing is a real thing that they do, and it's a very easy way to expose whether you're dealing with a liar or not, or someone who also just cares about you or doesn't care about you. Because let's say that they're telling the truth, that they do have X, Y, and Z connections, and they make some kind of promise to assist you in whatever way with the connections that they have. If they make that promise to you and then you take them up on that promise and they don't follow through, do they actually care about you? That's the other half of the question to ask. Why would they make the promise if they didn't actually plan on following through? And the other thing to be aware of is when they say that they will follow through, and then they come up with reasons that make sense for why they were not able to get in contact with the person, why the person is not actually able to help after all, things like that. There was one guy I was dating who, he said that he had an attorney, and then every time that I kind of dug in a little bit and was trying to see what his attorney's name was, things like that, he became very evasive, said that his laptop wasn't working whenever I would try and ask to see an email. One time said I could be there for the conversation he was going to have with his attorney, and then kept saying his attorney needed to reschedule. I mean, if you really start paying attention, there's very easy ways to see when they're just an extravagant promise maker or an extravagant liar. The other way that you can see that they're bluffing about their extravagant promises is that
a lot of times I've also seen where they will give the favor once and they don't mind doing it the first time, whether that's offering to help pay for something, whatever. And then they offer again. And when I follow up again, they start to get annoyed with me. They start to get mad with me. So they were okay with doing the favor the first time to make themselves look good, but they don't actually want to consistently support me in whatever kind of way. And this isn't being a mooch with someone, but it's just following up on what someone says. If they offer something, what's wrong with actually taking someone up on that offer? But they will try and gaslight you or me. They would try and gaslight me to act like me following up on the favor that they offered had to do with something being wrong with me. And that's also where you can start to see the kind of character that they have. Because again, if we're looking long-term in a relationship, you actually want to be involved with someone who follows up on the things that they say that they're going to do, who isn't just a giant liar. So if they seem frustrated by you asking them to do the things that they actually said they wanted to do, or if they seem like someone who is annoyed by the idea of supporting you in different ways, do you actually want to be with that person long term?
And so again, this is where the rubber really meets the road, and it does get very difficult for survivors of abuse to be able to do these things. Because again, like I stated earlier in this video, we have been left incredibly handicapped. A lot of these protective muscles have been essentially metaphorically weakened, and we are handicapped because of that. And as I stated earlier in this video, I also have struggled with this. I also have fallen for the gaslighting, the boundary pushing, the boundary testing. I also have compromised on things that were really important goals for myself, that I told them were really important goals for myself. And I think that's why it's so important for us to verbalize up front what our expectations are of them and what our expectations are of ourselves. Not to tell them everything in your heart, because that's incredibly unsafe, but just to state up front, whatever it is you decide that you're going to hold back to see how they reach for it, let them know that. It's not in a manipulative way, but just say, hey, this is something that's really important to me, and I just wanted to let you know that if you're okay with it, and I always check in with them and I say, if you're okay with this, this is kind of where I'm at right now, and for the first few months that we talk, this is kind of the expectation that I have for how I want to go slow with things. And even after saying that to them, and I think it's important to say it so that you can see how they acknowledge it, and so that they can't take back later that they didn't know that this was an expectation that you have. Once you've clearly set that boundary, I have compromised and I failed myself in the things that I told them that were important to me, because we're human and we're learning, and a lot of times it takes practice to get better at these things. But I just want to encourage you and let you know that even when you compromise and fail on the things that you're trying to change about yourself, that you've told them are important for you when in what you're trying to change, there is still a way to tell who they are, what type of person they are when you fail and when you compromise. And this is actually the third tell, because again, we're looking for that person who is loyal, who is protective, and who has that sacrificial love. And unfortunately, a lot of times I've also seen with these people, when I have fallen for the boundary testing and boundary pushing, and I am so grieved by me feeling like a failure in the ways that I've compromised that I really didn't want to, it also has been really sad to see how little they care. Again, with their words, oftentimes they say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh, you're so right. We shouldn't have done X, Y, and Z things, and they'll comfort me in the moment. But you can tell how little they actually care, because A, they're oftentimes very ready to move on to the next boundary to break down. Let's say that we didn't have full-on sex, but I engaged in other behavior that I regretted later. They'll comfort me about that thing, but then they're already ready to engage in that behavior again and move on to the next one. So I see that. The other thing that I see is that even though they comfort me once about it, they move on very quickly mentally. They never bring it up again. They never check in with me later to see how I'm doing after that. The conversation only happens because I bring it up, because I initiate the conversation. And after that conversation ends, that is not on their minds in any way whatsoever. They've already moved on mentally because it's not important to them. They don't care that I'm devastated, that I'm sad, and that I compromised on something. They don't care. And that is not a protective sacrificial mindset that I'm looking for. That's not a loyal mindset.
And I think the other distinction that I wanted to make in this video, just to constantly reemphasize this stuff for anyone younger or especially recently brainwashed and emotionally vulnerable, you really need to understand that someone really is a stranger for a significant period of time, more than I think we actually consider in society. I think sometimes it's like we've known someone 2 weeks and we think, oh, this person isn't a stranger anymore, I know them. But how do you measure who is a stranger and who is a person that you know very well? I would encourage you to examine that because a lot of times we learn people like the back of our hand. We learn people very well through their actions, not through their words. And after I have begun to take it slow in relationships with people, I've begun to see that really it isn't until about month 2 or month 3 that they really are someone that I know who is less than a stranger to me. But really for the first 2 months, they kind of are a stranger because there's just so much that I don't know about them. And how many decisions do you actually want to be making with a stranger? That's where it can get really dangerous.
Go slow. Take your time. Don't give away valuable things to a complete stranger. See how they reach for the things that you don't give them. Watch. Be aware. See their tells and call their bluff. Thank you for watching, and God bless.